movement is a source of joy, it's a source of meaning, it's a source of pride, and all of those things are going to elevate you, and that elevation is going to bring other people up. It's going to enable you to manage stress. It's going to enable you to manage conflict. It's going to boost your capacity to, maintain equanimity. All of these things. So, there are so many psychological, emotional resources that are available from different kinds of movement.
Well, welcome back to the Takeoff. I'm Max Henry, your host. We've got a really fun episode today with Flynn Disney, who I have known, again, like many of these guests, for a very long time. Flynn is a parkour practitioner, originally out of the London area. That's when I met him when he was coaching with Parkour Generations. I then got to have a crazy, crazy experience with him hitchhiking across Denmark, which we go into. Spoiler alert, it does end with us having a gun pulled on us in a car. A pretty wild time. And as Flynn has progressed through his coaching and movement journey, he has dug into behavior, learning, emotions, psychology, and is now creating a framework, a book that he's calling The Emotional Athlete, and has created a framework that speaks to the ways that anxiety, confidence, joy, and a bunch of other emotions all play into our experience of learning and progression in the context of movement, and also how movement can be a very valuable and even fundamental tool to understanding how we relate to our emotional experience of the world around us. So, this one gets a little deep at times. I think there are parts where we kind of slow down and really digest some ideas. So, I would encourage you to take your time with this one, give it a listen because Flynn is such a deep thinker. I mentioned it in the podcast a few times, but he has a fantastic Substack, which I'll link in the description. If you want to just read some very insightful and thought-provoking material, I definitely recommend going to check out his Substack. And additionally, we had a couple recording issues. I feel like that's been a theme recently, so you might notice a few hard cuts where the recording drops out or something, and I just kind of cut it back in. I tried to make it as intuitive and non-distracting as possible so that you don't lose the thread of anything that Flynn is saying, but wanted to throw that out there. Thank you guys as always for listening. Again, I encourage you to kind of sit down and let this one roll over you, and try and really appreciate what Flynn has to say, because I think for all practitioners, his framework really provides a very insightful and calming, intuitive, informative way to understand how we relate to movement at a very deep and fundamental level. All right, let's get into it.
We were walking the other day in this a really amazing space in northwest London called the Pergola, which is almost like a castle. Like it's a really strange space. It has some kind of like weird tragic love story associated with it, but it has a lot of height. It's like two-story that you can walk on this little promenade. And I was there with my son, and he pointed to the wall that's like 2 and a bit stories up, and he said, "I want to walk on that." And I was there. I don't want to. Yeah, I was there with his mom and my mom, and it's kind of like not like so into that. So I said to him, "It's too high," and then we moved on. And then I said, "Oh, like there's this little tic tac over here. He likes doing tic tac sometimes." So I said, "Maybe we can do this." And he was like, "Oh, it's too high." So he used that like immediately, that kind of excuse. So that's been a really
Yeah.
interesting thing, is observing when I say like, "I'm really sorry, I can't do this. I'm too busy." He will now tell me that he can't put his shoes on because he's too busy. Stuff like this. So it's been really interesting. Like, what is the way of communicating that allows progression?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting one. For the listener, Flynn Disney, welcome to the Takeoff. Depending on if we hop in here or later, but we've just been dad chatting as things go. Um, so you've got a little one. We both just have recently 2-year-olds. And something that I try and do with Margot, it's so interesting how when I try to give her explanations, I like very consciously try to frame it as in like, this is too high for you right now. Or like she was playing at a playground recently, and it was probably like a ages 7 and up designed playground. And there is one section that I felt like, okay, you're kind of aware enough to think you can navigate this one, and it goes up to about 10 feet. And there's plenty of options to fall off, but it was pretty within her physical realm. And so I let her do that one by herself. And then she wanted to go to this other one, which was like this vertical tunnel essentially with holes all over the kids can kind of like climb in and out. And I was like, I don't know that you quite have the spatial awareness for me to feel confident that you won't not see something. um and so it was like, I think that one's going to be too too big for you right now, but when you're older you can do it. Or like just trying to find the ways to phrase it. It's so interesting, because to your point, yeah, kids just latch onto something and then
Yeah, they
they're
really
immediately,
remember things, and yeah, it's you never know how
well, the
something's going
theme,
to be interpreted.
yeah. Yeah, well, I was gonna say, well, for the listener who maybe is not familiar with you, um, you are and fantastic coach. You are a total nerd about all things learning, behavioral, emotional, psychological, physical, and I am curious, being a parent now, how has that affected the way that you look at learning, getting to kind of see it in your gray lab at home firsthand?
So many things. I think one recently has been how we manage anger and frustration. Because if you have a toddler, you know that they get really frustrated. We thought that the terrible twos were gonna brush past us until it got to like 2.5, and then it got pretty terrible. um, we've had some rough times. We're kind of on the other side of it now, but we still have these like meltdowns. From, not really meltdowns, more kind of tantrums, like a little bit less than a meltdown. But yeah, he gets angry, and I think the some of the conventional wisdom has been to kind of allow that anger to be expressed and to encourage it. Oh, go and scream or hit the cushion, this kind of thing. And so, just kind of through thinking about it through like the first principles of like behavioral conditioning, it was like I started to kind of suspect that this was not a very good thing to do because there's like in Buddhist terminology, at least how I pronounce it, papancha, which is like things tend to proliferate when you do something. It tends to continue being done. And so when you express anger, it tends to continue being expressed. The same is also true of joy. So when you express joy, it tends to continue being expressed. So that's a cool thing as well. But we found ways to help him get through anger through storytelling, and also some Buddhist kind of work on letting go and unclenching, and finding ways to create those stories for him to share those stories in a way that is interesting, and visceral and physical. And so using physical touch to talk about kind of tension or tana, this kind of clenching that the body does, that causes a lot of discomfort and suffering, and finding, so he's now, sometimes he asks for the Buddha story or the Prince story,
Nice.
and we have this story about how this young man learned to destroy the monsters by kind of opening up and letting go. And so I'll often tell him these kinds of stories when he's upset. We just sit down and we take a little bit of time, and when we come out the other side, he's generally, I think it's been so far like 100% success rate that he's able to just kind of move on after that.
Yeah, that's it's interesting because anger, like distraction, obviously can work, and sometimes all they need is to get their mind out of the hyperfixation that they have on being so deep in that feeling. But I think I think it was in your Substack you were sharing the story about this, and sort of this concept of expansion and contraction when you're feeling negative emotions or anger. And I thought that was a really powerful way to view it, was kind of letting the anger, feeling it and letting it expand through yourself, and expressing it, but expressing it in a way that kind of disperses it, as opposed to expressing it in a way that focuses it on whatever the external thing is that's frustrating you. I'm gonna scream, or I'm gonna throw my toy, or and the most fascinating thing to me as a parent is watching how much of a person your kid is from the very beginning, and especially when they start to be able to talk, like, Margot's incredibly chatty, not surprising for anybody who knows me, but, now that she can really communicate and express herself, you're like, "Wow, you are such a little person, and you have such strong opinions and feelings," and, whenever she has a tantrum or anything like that, it's so funny because I see that, my emotions reflected, just kind of the order of magnitude changes, but you're like, "Oh, that little person is still inside me, having all of those same feelings and emotions and experiences, and we're just channeling them in slightly different ways, and we've built up habits to express them and deal with them." But I think that the getting to re-experience the purity of a human's emotional state is kind of wild. And, yeah, you talk a lot about emotions in the work that you're doing now. Before we get into too much of that, though, I would love to hear a little bit more about how you got into it. So the last time that we hung out,
Mm.
um, other than my favorite story of all time, which I might ask you to relay,
I would like to.
when we were in Denmark together,
I
but
was
the
hoping
last
you would
time we
ask
hung out,
about.
you were yes, we were just getting into behavioral stuff, but
And
maybe let's start with
I'm
that because
thrilled that it's your favorite story of all time as well.
it was yeah, I'll let you share it because I think I have a we shared this experience that for me was very informative about how I experience the world and my internal state, but I'm really curious to hear from your perspective. So I'll set you up. I was in Denmark going to visit you and Nick Ortiz and a handful of other people at Allerup, and I was with the Merm guys on the What Happened tour. We decided to hitchhike from Copenhagen to Allerup after I had been assured that it was going to be a pretty easy, uneventful way to get there and save a few hundred Danish krona on the train ticket. And it turned out to be, we did get there, but it certainly was not an uneventful journey.
Yeah, yeah. In true parkour fashion, we ended up leaving the jam at like 5 or 6 p.m., which is like not when you want to start a like 200 kilometer hitchhike. Um, so it was like it was middle of summer, so I think the sun was going down pretty late, but it took us a lot longer to get any rides. I think when we left it, that we had like 5 or 6 people all together trying to hitchhike, which is a completely ridiculous
It
thing. But
was
we
a
actually
great
managed to get a
so it
good
was
bit.
the 2 of us, Callum and Sasha Powell, Greg
Yeah, yeah,
Eccles, and I think Peter Schiffler. So that
amazing.
was, I think, the entire hitchhiking crew, and then we split up into the you and I, Greg and Callum,
Mhm.
and then Sasha and Peter, and we
Yeah,
realized yeah, if we went in groups of 2, we'd be a
yeah.
little less intimidating to pick
Smart,
up.
smart thinking. Yeah. So we did get some rides in the end. Sort of 2 or 3 rides took us to the big bridge that connects Jutland and I forget the name of the other island. I'm sorry, Danish listeners.
Foon, I think. Yeah.
Very good. So we were right on the bridge on the Fyn side, maybe where Copenhagen is. You can fact
Mhm.
check me on that. And we were waiting for a long time. Like I think we were there for quite a while, like maybe an hour or maybe more, and kind of giving up hope. I think we were really getting close to just trying to like find a little corner to cuddle up, share some body heat together because it was not so warm. And then the car stops by, and they stop by, and they're kind of like, "Okay, now come quickly, quickly." And it's like, "Oh, that's a bit weird. Can I put our bags in the back?" No, no, not in the back, not in the back. Well, that's a bit weird as well. So I think we took our stuff and we sat in the back seats, and we were chatting to these guys. It was 3 guys of what background were they? I'm not sure, but they're like some kind of Middle Eastern.
Yeah, maybe Turkish or yeah.
This was also yeah. Well, I'll go on. Um, they started talking about how they were maybe on TV. You remember this? They said like we're famous. We're
Yeah.
famous. We're on
I
television.
think
Oh,
they said,
really?
"Do you recognize our friend?" Yeah, he's our friend,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
driver.
that's
He's
right.
famous.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, oh, yeah, he's famous. What is he famous for? And I remember they said protecting the city. I said, "Oh, oh, protecting the city. Oh, is that a bit like Batman? You know, just trying to make small talk." And he said, "No." And then he shows us his handgun, and that's the moment
Yep.
where, yeah, things got a bit interesting. Um,
Yes.
I
Yeah,
remember I
the
was just
the
trying to
passenger seat was
appease.
very friendly.
Yeah, yeah. I went into appeasement mode. I was just like, "Yeah, so we're all just hanging out. We're all friends, like just trying to keep it really chill." And I remember later on you were saying like I was ready to just choke hold the driver, jump out of the moving car. It was like amazing. Um,
My impression of this whole thing is he turned around and uh I did not get the impression that he was showing us this gun in a threatening manner. It was more kind of like, look how cool we are. We're celebrating whatever's going on. But yeah, in my head, the uncertainty of the whole situation, I'm thinking, okay, we're going like 40 kilometers an hour. It's pretty grassy out there. It's wet. We could definitely roll out of this car if we need to. I could, like the guy with the gun, I'm right behind him. If anything goes down, I need to be ready to go. And I'm so impressed because this entire time I'm getting into like full fight or flight, ready to wreak mortal havoc if needed to save my own skin. And you're just kind of like casually, oh, yeah, oh, that's great. Definitely not like Batman. He wasn't a big fan of using guns. That was
yeah.
kind of his whole thing, just casually having this conversation.
Yeah, yeah. But
And
that's funny because
very,
I always, when I tell this story, I always admire your readiness. So it's funny if you have a similar feeling towards my calm, let's say.
yeah. I think it was a really fascinating experience because so long story short, and this is does end up being a long story because we are at midnight. I don't think we ended up getting to Allerup until 5 or 6 in the morning, and many other hilarious things happened on that trip. But they did take us to the train. They
They
ended
did.
up being friendly. They picked us up. They were great. I was fascinated. I don't know if you remember this when we did open the back trunk. It was full of, was it apple juice boxes?
Yeah, I thought it was peach juice.
Peach juice boxes, but in inordinate amount,
That's fair.
to the point that to this day, I'm pretty confident that they were probably smuggling some kind of drugs in the boxes because it
Oh,
was, I may be exaggerating in my memory, but it was like, it looked like several hundred small children's sized juice boxes
exactly. Hundreds of
where
small bottles of juice. It is a little
three
suspicious
adult
now that you
men
mention it.
at midnight with handgun on
No
them.
one
I'm
could drink that
thinking,
much juice. No.
yeah, I was thinking, okay, there's definitely a product in here that they are moving
Yeah.
under the radar. Um, but they ended up being the only people who stopped to pick us up and take us to the train, and we did get to Allerup eventually. So one of those situations where it could easily have gone badly, and was the first time I think that I've also felt like I was in a life-threatening situation that suddenly was completely out of my control. And I think that was really illuminating for me, and what really stuck with me is like seeing and experiencing in my body what that had happened. Because in parkour, you put yourself in situations willingly where you're autonomously entering a life-threatening scenario. You're looking at a jump or a roof gap or something, or you're climbing at height, and you've kind of done the work of the variables. But I had never been thrust into a scenario where I'm like, oh, actually, all it takes is for this person to turn another 10 degrees and move their index finger a handful of centimeters to take this from casual hitchhiking experience to suddenly like very life or death. And yeah, the flood of adrenaline and just cortisol was wild on my end, which is I think why I was full adrenal, and then you're just kind of like all relaxed, making conversation. Like, what a lovely guy. These guys are probably thinking, man, that guy's so cool in the back, and his very quiet friend looks really stressed.
Oh, it's funny. It's funny.
Yeah, so that was when you were definitely in big parkour mode. Why don't you tell me a little bit about how your journey has been going from um that time through when we met up in London and you were just getting into
Mm.
sort of the canine behavioral stuff.
Cool. Yeah, so I used to work with Parkour Generations for a few years, and I think parkour at the time maybe it was not what it is now. I know there's a lot of conversation around the financial struggle and the lack of some people have the opinion that there's a lack of money coming in. There are
Viability.
yeah, viability. There are counterpoints to that. Like I've heard the Olo company, for example, is doing very well. So there are, there is counter evidence that there actually is money in parkour. But at that time, it really felt like there wasn't. So I was looking for alternative pathways. I just turned maybe 26, which is that kind of age where I at least realized that life is going to go on. It's not like you're going to be young forever, and like these things will change, and your perspectives will change, and having those kinds of insights. So yeah, I was looking for an alternative career. So I started studying animal behavior, mostly as an autodidact. I did some online courses, but I didn't find them really satisfying. So I did a lot of independent study. I started offering my services for very little money, but I got quite a lot of consistent clients actually out of that. So that was quite a cool thing. So I was maybe 27 or 28, that kind of time. No, I've got my timelines mixed up. I think then I was around 26. But yeah, so I started doing a bit of canine behavior work, and that was very illuminating because you realize that there's a lot going on in terms of behavior. It's I think the kind of learning that I did was a lot about operant conditioning, behaviorism, this kind of direct lineage of B.F. Skinner, who wrote a book called Beyond Freedom and Dignity, which is a kind of a way of imagining society that could be controlled through scientific means. So he was a very like non-ecological thinker. It
Hmm.
was very like the mind is unknowable, but behavior is
Mm.
measurable. So we can just measure behavior and manipulate behavior and this kind of thing. And just firsthand, you just realize that there's more to that because once you go to work with a dog, that dog is inside of a family, and that family has all kinds of stuff going on. So I think quite quickly with the dog training work, I did this for about 2 years, and I increasingly got the sense that I was actually not equipped to do this because I didn't have a clear enough sense of what are all of these dynamics. Like there's so much going on here. There's so much going on. I don't have the knowledge, the skill, the capacity to coordinate a whole family of people. So I wanted to dig a bit deeper into that. Um, Yeah, and I think I got kind of emboldened through this learning process, where I was like, I didn't do, I barely did, I didn't enjoy school. I did very poorly in that system. So this was my first time actually experiencing myself as someone who had the capacity to learn. And and
How did that bring you back to movement? And I guess where did that how did you re-enter movement, and how did that 2-year hiatus, at least professional hiatus, impact the way that you looked at movement?
yeah, well, I got very into the work of a guy called Stephen Porges. Never heard
Okay.
it pronounced, but he was into this idea of safety, and that's something that I observed a lot in both fields, of course, of parkour and also in animal behavior. Was that we are generally at our best when we feel safe. So he provided this kind of really in-depth, like physiological framework for understanding where the sense of safety is located in the body. And I found that very attractive also as a kind of like materialist, like reductionist kind of thinker, at least at the time, if not now. um I was like, wow, this is amazing because it's so like explanatory for so much of my behavior, other people's behavior, this sort of thing. So um I think through that kind of work I became more interested in kind of exploring that in the context of my practice of teaching again. I started offering more independent kind of one-to-one type work and classes. Um, yeah, and I think my kind of return to parkour after this kind of dog training venture, let's say, was
Side
really,
quest.
yeah, side quest, yeah, was really motivated by like a really keen desire to explore and understand. And so some of that early work has kind of fallen away, like been not fallen away, but been iterated upon. For example,
Hmm.
the Stephen Porges work, it's like there are aspects of that that I think are really valuable, but the theory itself is like very problematic and overly complex. But there are many things from that are very nice. But we can talk about like safety and confidence and how these are kind of two sides of the same coin. So there's some really nice research there. But one of the things that continued from this time was the idea of exploration. And so again, I was very attracted to this idea of exploration as a something as a kind of explanation of behavior, if that makes sense. So exploration being something
Hmm.
that we do as humans, but also animals do, individuals do, but we also do at a kind of species level. That it's this kind of ubiquitous drive towards novelty, information. It's kind of like a mode of being. So I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like this is such a cool thing. So I started doing these exploration sessions, which I just recently restarted. But it's like a physical exploration in the city. So you go out without a plan, and it's fully improvised kind of elements of parkour, climbing, urbex. And when I did this recently for the first time in many years in London, you sort of reiterate that it's like, okay, from here we don't know what's going to happen. We're going to just kind of run in this direction and find challenges, find opportunities. And there's like a wave of excitement that you can feel through the people. So it's a really
Hmm.
exciting way to move. Um,
Yeah.
so that kind of brought me in, and then that idea of exploration, of kind of engaging in exploration, also means engaging with uncertainty. And so that was also very inspiring. So I was like, well, whatever route there is for me forwards, as like I'm already in this like weird pathway that I don't quite understand. It's like whatever route for me there is forwards, it's I'm going to find that path by um, going towards uncertainty. So I went into these kind of research projects that I started kind of slowly inviting people into, um, and that was kind of the origin of the work that I'm doing now. Like it started off as a very 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 explorative, where we would take something kind of solid, like some kind of like solid principle, and then ask like how can we apply this in different ways. And I did this for
Hmm.
several years, and then that kind of slowly started transforming into like discoveries, and the work on joy has become like a big part of the product of that process. So and then it has its own kind of process of iteration. But yeah, so I've kind of come out with some really like unique and really cool bodies of work on joy, confidence, anxiety, that have come from this process of kind of engaging with uncertainty and asking big questions. And that's kind of brought me back to
Yeah.
movement in a way that's less oriented towards parkour. I also had the insight like many years ago that for me, I didn't really feel a pathway in parkour. I didn't really sense that there was a space like for me in parkour, maybe at that time or just in general. For my mind, for my skill level, it was never like the apex, like top of the game or anything like this. So it was like, and the coaching community was also not so well developed there, and there wasn't so much of a space for uh, really like people to really develop the coaching game, like not just to do it, but to do it like really, really well. I didn't really feel like there was a space for that, and I wanted to like go forwards somewhere, but I didn't want to do that in a way that wouldn't be, rewarded financially.
Hmm.
So that led me to this insight of like, well, the work that could work would be something that would be so general and so broad that it could attract many different people from different disciplines and professions. And so now I'm working with like rock climbers, yoga teachers, surf teachers, like really diverse groups because they're all sharing these same ubiquitous like emotional experiences of joy, anxiety, confidence, and so there's a common thread. So that was a really a nice insight that served me very well
Yeah.
many years ago.
I feel like your framework or your approach is this like biopsychosocial inspired movement framework, or putting a lot of I really like that you identify exploration and uncertainty as sort of the two through lines in that story that you had, because I think exploration is a great one to dig into. To me, that is kind of the key insight that parkour has to offer for people. And it's funny that you're kind of talking about not knowing necessarily where you fit in this community at the time. One of the first questions that I wanted to start this conversation with, and we went a different way, was how do you envision, or what do you envision the role is for movement in the life of a normal adult? Because a conversation that I've had that has come up so often is that for a lot of us who started parkour and it was kind of our core passion, when you have maxed out your Lachey precision distance and you're suddenly, in your 30s, balancing a family and kids and lack of sleep and all these other things, you realize that the relationship that you're going to have with goal setting and with your practice changes dramatically, because there is not this continued exponential progression of output. And something that I think our community has struggled with is figuring out what goal setting looks like for an adult practitioner who is maybe still incredibly talented, because I view you as a very talented parkour athlete. I don't know how much you're still training, but every time I see you move, I still think your movement is really technical and gorgeous. And, I think that you've always been a really, really talented athlete. But at a certain
I,
point, you're like, okay, well, what can I do? I'm not going to be doing like a 15-foot like step in plyo anymore with a 6-foot drop to a rail. So like how does that goal setting change? And I think that in a broader context, maybe let's start with that initial question of what do you see movement as, with the role of movement in the life of a normal adult in that relationship? How do you view that? And then we can kind of dig into the parkour side.
such a good question. There's an idealistic question, but I think the reality there's an idealistic answer. Um, but I think the reality is so the idealistic answer I think would be that movement is can be a means to an end. I think this would be like the ideal way to use movement as a kind of adult with responsibilities. Is that movement is a source of joy, it's a source of meaning, it's a source of pride, and all of those things are going to elevate you, and that elevation is going to bring other people up. It's going to enable you to manage stress. It's going to enable you to manage conflict. It's going to boost your capacity to maintain equanimity. All of these things. So it's like there are so many psychological emotional resources that are available from different kinds of movement. But I think the reality is that you need the right narrative to even engage in that kind of thing. And so what I'm describing in this ideal example is a kind of narrative, is to say that if I view movement as something that has to serve me, and then different kinds of movement can serve me in different ways, that's a narrative that I think is a very good narrative for older, for more, let's say, mature people. Um,
Mhm.
but I think a lot of the time you're inheriting a cultural narrative, and that cultural narrative might be from parkour, where it's a lot about progression, particularly in back in my day, there's a lot about progression and performance. Now it's maybe a bit more open up to like joy and play. I see that as like being much more of a present focus that's being like rewarded more on social media and stuff like this, which is cool. But I think for a lot of people in the world, the narrative is all about how things look and what metrics can be shown, and this kind of thing. rather than, yeah, like what can this give me? What can this enable me to do? So I think it really matters to find the the goal or the way of interpreting what
Mhm.
we're trying to achieve. Um, yeah, so I think that would be a cool kind of narrative for people to either inherit. I think these things always kind of have to be inherited because it takes a lot of introspection to get there by yourself, and introspection is very expensive, and it's not reasonable to ask people to to introspect so much. So I think a kind of I think a lot of like movement culture seems like it's headed a bit in this direction. Like people are a bit older now in that culture. Like Ido is some mysterious age, but he's definitely he's well over 40. So he's like an older man now, and the way that he's talking about movement is not about like pushing the limits. But I think in parkour, the narrative is a lot about pushing the limits, and then maybe uh, getting joy from that. Um, but yeah, I actually hurt my foot quite badly when my son was 1 month old, and I couldn't walk for the second month of his life. That was
Neither
rough.
could he, so that at
Well,
least was
that's true.
helpful.
That is true.
As you
Yeah,
know
so we
now
were
with
both
an older kid,
crawling
man,
around. Yeah.
when you can't walk when they're two, it becomes dangerous. Margot only goes full sprint or is static. Those are the only two modes that she has.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, so that was a bit of a switch for me to that gave me anxiety in the sense of, well, my narrative is uh like progress, like pushing regular parkour training, like heights are desirable, like stuff like this. Um, like social media likes equals profit. Like this was still a bit of a narrative. I think that this is something that I would push for. Um, but then after that fall, it was like, well, actually, my narrative now it really does have to change.
Hmm.
And I've run into that head on. So it was it was really a blessing to have this injury, even though it was really a disaster for quite a while.
Hmm.
Excuse me.
You're good. What is your narrative
That's a
now? Like,
bird.
how do you?
Tell me.
So what is your narrative now? How do you feel like you've kind of reconciled
Mm.
the narrative that you inherited through early parkour, which I totally agree everything you said. I think that's also a big reason why parkour is seen by so many as hyper masculine. Um, is that it is well, it was hyper masculine, especially in the early days, being created exclusively by young, incredibly athletic men who were looking to essentially interrogate what manhood meant for them, but also that we then inherited all of these narratives about progression and strength, and this idea that progression would be endless. I think that's the sort of
Mm.
glass ceiling that we're coming up to now in
That's
the
an interesting.
community is a lot of people, myself included, for a long time had this conception that, well, if you just keep training, you'll progress indefinitely into the future. And on an abstract level, I think we all knew that when you get to your 40s, your 50s, or your 60s, that your movement will constantly change and your level will constantly adapt to the realities of your body. But it's different to have that lived experience. So, yeah, I'm curious from everything that you just said about the narrative that you inherited, what was your narrative and your framing
Mm.
for how movement interacts with your life now?
Yeah, I think like a lot of young men, I really feared consistency, and I really feared repetition, and the idea of doing the same thing again and again really filled me with dread. And I think that's quite common in the for young people. Um, and so I think that was something that I had to kind of move towards in this phase of my life, which having a child is very repetitive, and you have to accommodate that. Otherwise, you go mad, and you do accommodate it. That's the thing. You don't actually have to do anything. You just have to not run away. But so I think the narrative for me became a lot about consistency. Became a lot about like stability. What can I do that's going to give me stability? And I would say now, more so in the last year or so, the narrative is also what's going to bring me joy, what's going to bring me serenity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, more so serenity, I think, more so a sense of peace with how things are. Um, yeah, so I think that's and then also, and this is what I slightly lack, but I would love more and more and more of is connection, and is really being with other people, and not just being in the same space, because I think a lot of parkour training can be being in the same space as other people, but actually really being with other people is a different thing, and it has a very different feeling. Like when you really train with someone, like that's amazing. But a lot of the time
Yeah.
in parkour, we're actually just doing our own thing around other people, and that's a lot less satisfying, even if you make a lot of progress. So I find now
Yep.
I'm also if I'm in the right moment, then I'm very like trying to switch on to how can I how can we be together in this process, and trying to be more willing to step aside. I think this is something that I still maybe struggle with a bit. Is I still orient towards like what would be a sick challenge to do, and so there's still a bit of
Yep.
like residual narrative. So it's also nice for you to ask this. I think it's clarifying for me, because I think the higher value for me would be actually the connection with other people is a lot more fruitful in terms of what I actually care about, which is uh, experiencing things that I'm going to bring back like positively into my home. I would say that's kind of what I really care about. So again, the exploration session that I ran recently uh, was so joyful and so connecting, and it was very together, like because you're helping people physically. You're it's a lot of laughter, a lot of discovery all together, and so this kind of experience is like it's so energizing and joyful. And I think that's another thing that for my first, I don't know, 6 or 7 or more years of training, if someone asked me, "Can you spot me?" I would say no. You need to do it yourself. Did you also have this kind of narrative?
Yeah, I think that that was definitely the early parkour days were hyper individualistic. It's interesting because you're the connection aspect, right? The and you know from coaching with parkour generations, I think Yamakaze, there
Yeah.
was definitely a heavy
Hmm.
emphasis on connection, but it
Hmm.
was more of a I'll pick you up if you fall down. It wasn't a I'm here to help you get through this. It was like I will support you in a very hands-off way. Um so I think I was absolutely against spotting, and I think I still have mixed feelings on it for the most part because I'd struggle with like when you let somebody work through the entire like the going through the process on your own with guidance is an incredibly powerful experience. And yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at with the spotting issue.
Yeah. My phone is telling me that it has low device storage, which is
We got
easily remedied.
too many baby photos. Should we take a quick hiatus? It's
Let's
okay.
take
I'll
another
just
quick hiatus. Yeah.
sweet. Well, I do want to talk a little bit about, joy keeps coming up, and I when I was reading through your Substack, which if you're listening and you want a literal treasure trove of just interesting thought prompts and descriptions, your Substack is amazing. I went in being like, I'm going to do a quick little bit of research, and I think I read 15 short articles that you've written. And you're writing them weekly or bi-weekly sometimes, which is very
Yeah,
impressive.
yeah.
And
I,
I
I'm. Mhm.
find them all really powerful. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. That's amazing. Yeah, I'm engaging in a book writing process right now. Like I want to
That's
squash a lot of this work together, and also elevate it to a higher level. So yeah, I'm on a small hiatus right now, but yeah, I've been writing 2 times a week for the last month or so.
Yeah, so the book, correct me if I'm wrong, is The Emotional Athlete, is
Yeah.
what I've gathered. and it looks really fascinating. And I like the I find joy, anxiety, confidence to me, and serenity, which as you kind of you can feel free to describe all of those, but for the listener, my takeaway is, serenity is this sort of positive experience of an event with sort of a lower emotional or lower energy, vibe. Obviously, I think joy is this sort of higher energy, bubbly, positive experience. Those 4 feel very core to my practice of parkour and my experience of parkour, and I love that you talk so much about the importance of emotions in life, and especially in the context of a movement practice, because when I chat with people, and again, a lot of the listeners here are parkour, so I'm we're getting very into that, and feel free to kind of we can broaden it as much as we want, but I'll talk from that perspective. When I chat with people who've kind of fallen out of love with the sport, one of the core things that the commonalities that I see is the emotional valence of their relationship to parkour has
Mhm.
just dwindled. The experiences, they're just sort of getting these diminishing returns of dopamine hits or whatever it was, and they're not having these powerful, emotionally resonant memories and moments in their practice. And I think that the way that you're incorporating and explaining emotions and how they tie into our experience of life and our relationship to the environment and movement in our bodies felt like a great framework for people to um, reassess how to bring emotion into their practice to strengthen that experience. So would you mind giving us a breakdown of I guess the emotional athlete being a broad sort of overlook, but particularly those 4 pillars?
Yeah. I think it's hmm.
Describe your life's work in the next 3 minutes. Go.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I'll pick on the thread of people dropping out because I think that's like very tangible, and then maybe we can circle back. I mean, it's also really nice for me like to talk about this as a research um, process. So yeah, as you said, with serenity being this lower arousal, positive affect, positive meaning pleasant, although positive can also mean
And
expansive.
lower arousal being a state of energy, not a state of sexual excitement. Although the
Yes,
sometimes can be the same.
yes, yes. So arousal just means like energy. I should go this way. Arousal just
Sorry,
means
listeners.
yeah, bit of ear candy. So arousal means like your energy level. So how energized you feel. So right now we're both like I don't say pretty aroused, but no, we're both like in a pretty chill sort of intermediate state. Like there's a bit of excitement. Like I'm excited to talk to you, but I'm not like bouncing off the walls. So we're in a kind of like
Mhm.
moderate arousal level. My valence is quite high right now because it's a pleasure talking to you. Um, I can feel it's hard to locate in my body, but there's a general quality of like pleasant feeling, like good feel. So this is called core affect, and this is these two dimensions of valence, pleasantness and unpleasantness of an experience, and arousal, the level of energy of an experience. So it makes this really simple XY graph. Then you get these four, quadrants. Um, serenity is in the low arousal but feels good, low arousal, high valence quadrant. And I think this is the really underrated thing in parkour is actually how can I go out and not look like joy would be. This is how I describe it. Like not everyone agrees with this, but I find it really clear to describe joy as high arousal, high valence. Joy is specifically when you're excited. It's like you're like wow, like it's like an exuberance there, like to joy. Like it's really like a high energy emotion. Whereas serenity
Mhm.
serenity, is compatible with joy, but generally the state of serenity, it's like you're pretty chill, but in a pleasant way. Like things feel good. So I think the ability to go out, have a training session, and just have like a calm but pleasurable time is quite underrated in the community. Um, I think parkour generally focuses on the higher arousal states, like joy and also fear, where
Mm-hmm.
your energy is high. Um, but the what's going to serve you? Like, there's also research that says the state most associated with well-being are the low arousal positive affects. So this is like serenity is like the thing that actually really helps us even more than joy. Joy is amazing. Joy gives us like so much cool stuff. Like, it makes us really extroverted and creative, really like liberated and like really good at moving a lot of the time. But it's serenity is the thing that's probably going to allow us to manage the moments that are not necessarily uh, joyful. So I think that's something that
Mm-hmm.
any practitioner can, any like practitioner who's an amateur. Amateur means like amour. It's like who someone who loves it. So um, anyone who does parkour for the love of it, then I think actually practicing in a way that helps you to feel serenity and learning how to do that, because that's also going to be a skill, because maybe you're going to go out and your mind's immediately going to go to what's the sickest, gnarliest, scariest thing that I can do. But maybe that's sometimes the wrong question, and maybe the right question is, how can I actually enjoy myself? How can I
Mm-hmm.
concentrate? And so this is when we can get a bit more specific into the research, is like, if we unpack serenity, like what contributes to a feeling of serenity. um, this is where we can now go off
Yeah.
into a tangent
Yeah.
for the
Well,
rest of
I
the
would like
podcast.
to
So
get into that. Yeah, I would like to dig into that a little bit because obviously there's a ton of research that strong emotions reinforce an experience and can create sort of stronger channels for how you relive or reinterpret that experience in memory and how it impacts your behavior going forward. Um, I do just I'm curious. So I mean, it sounds like joy and anxiety or fear are kind of the spices. Like they're great in small doses, but you can't make a meal out of a spice, and you need to have the sort of pasta and vegetables or meat and potatoes, and that maybe is this lower energy state of serenity. Um, yeah, why don't you dive off and tell us a bit about the research for what you've learned about getting in and out of these states, and also I'm curious how you think about the relationship between all of these states because obviously it sounds great to just be like lo-fi chill girl having a serene experience of the world all the time, but all of these emotions have their purpose in our experience of life. So why don't you maybe give us a little bit of a breakdown in more detail first, and then I would love to hear your thoughts on how you work with people to structure their relationship between these emotions and their goals, either in movement or outside of movement.
three mega questions. Okay, first one was
Yeah.
about the like more
I have a
specific.
problem doing this. Yeah.
There's also excitement. It's like there's also the joy of being here. So uh, about what is contributing to serenity, or what is contributing to
Mhm.
high valence low arousal. Um, if we go like to the deepest explanation and then work up, which we can also do, maybe that's fun. There's something called symmetry theory, which is the idea that if every qualia, every like subjective experience can be represented mathematically, so it's like kind of a hypothesis. It's like it's the idea that it's possible to represent every subjective experience mathematically. The experiences that have higher valence would have higher symmetry, Symmetry meaning invariance under transformation.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you have like a tennis ball, you have like the shadow of the tennis ball on the floor. No matter which way you move the tennis ball, like it's symmetrical. Um, so let's just take that for granted that more symmetrical experiences are more pleasurable and more kind of
Mm-hmm.
spiky. Like if I took a tissue and I scrunched it up, and then like you would see every time I moved the tissue, the shadow would change shape. That would represent like a lower valence experience, like anxiety. I think it's also quite intuitive to
Mm-hmm.
see. It's a bit like the Kiki Boba thing, um, if you know what that is. So the question is like how to increase symmetry, and so then there's research on like concentration essentially. So concentration
Okay.
doesn't necessarily mean like a very narrow focus. Like the word actually means to bring together. And so when we're
Mm-hmm.
concentrating on something, if you pay attention when you're concentrating, um, you'll notice that your valence is actually like pretty good. And so there are exercises that we do like walking very slowly. Like if you walk across a room in 20 minutes, you'd be surprised by how pleasurable that is.
Hmm.
Because there's a high level of concentration. Um, so generally, I think in parkour, like repetition is really underrated as a tool for like actually enjoying yourself. This is also like it's quite old school. Maybe there's like even like a taboo, around repetition. Um, this is why the repetition
Yeah.
is very important. Like it feels like antiquity, but actually, like repetition is can be very pleasant to do. Like when you just get stuck in and
Yeah.
you're not managing fear at all. You're just repeating, repeating, repeating. There's a lady, Paula Flynn, probably Paula because she's Australian.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she's doing a lot of. She made this point about how like I actually don't want to engage with like fear and anxiety. Like she's a mum, and so I think she's just training like for the joy and for the pleasure. And so she's doing really nice flows, and she's like obviously getting so much joy out of what she's doing. So this would, I think, also be a nice example of like someone who's oriented more towards the joy and the serenity of her practice. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I think that's also a great place to point out, as we're talking about how your relationship to engage with emotion can change the concentration. I mean, there's a ton of, I think people who are listening maybe are more familiar with a lot of the sort of like flow state research from Csikszentmihalyi and things like that, that in the sort of most boiled down way, you're balancing focus, difficulty, and sort of engagement, and finding sort of these sweet spots between, you know, how consequential or risky something is, how much focus it requires, and how much engagement it requires from you. And repetition is a great way to substitute the difficulty of a high risk activity, or maybe even because it can feel high risk. I mean, a great classic one that I'm sure you did many times when you started out, the old Yamakasi one, just try and do a jump 100 times without failing it once. And if you can do it 100 times in a row, you're done. And if you miss one at the 78th jump, you go back to the beginning, right? The risk that there is not physical
Mhm.
injury, but it is creating a framework of concentration that is still incredibly engaging, and that does feel like walking across a room in 20 minutes to me sounds boring, but I know from having done challenges like that or just setting arbitrary things like that for yourself that the internal experience of it becomes incredibly interesting because you're suddenly monitoring so many different things that ordinarily you're not thinking about at all. I don't know that I had a question there or anything to add other than that repetition is a great way to challenge people. That's something I've been doing in my own coaching as well, is just emphasizing re-emphasizing volume. And using repetition as a way to sort of substitute for a higher consequence
To
training,
draw a really
especially as you
clear
get a bit
circle,
older.
to draw a really clear circle also around this attribute of concentration. And so it's like you can do things in many different ways. It almost doesn't matter what you're doing, because I can
Hmm.
do 100 repetitions, but every single time I'm cursing my coach Max Henry for making me do it. Like that person is not going to have a very pleasant experience, although they might get an insight out of it.
Yeah.
Um, but the level of engagement or the level of concentration, like that's going to have a really strong influence on your valence. Yeah, yeah, and then
Yeah.
yeah.
So it, how, I mean, this is maybe a bit of an aside, but I feel like this is, we've also talked a lot about uncertainty. And I think that's kind of an underlying um, factor that plays into all of our experiences of all these emotional states. What is your impression of uncertainty and its role in concentration and helping kind of adjust how somebody is feeling and responding to a certain situation?
Yeah. When you think about it, everything has a level of uncertainty, because we're in this kind of Plato's cave where we're, you know, we're always experiencing the world through our senses. So there's always a layer of interpretation, at least in some models. In the
Hmm.
ecological dynamics model, that's not the case. There's direct contact, and that's something I'm trying to resolve, the tension between two different kind of theories. But in in I think in quite an intuitive way, when you at least in a way that when you think about it, the world outside is uncertain, and so we're always making this kind of interpretation of what is out there and what it means to us. Um, so we're always relating to it. So we're not just interpreting it; we're also relating to it. We're also deeply hardwired to perceive it. And so
Hmm.
a lot of anxiety is a really broad topic. So I'm always a bit hesitant to talk in broad strokes about it. But um, a lot of anxiety is a buildup of, or at least some types of anxiety are a buildup of uncertainty. Um, one of the ways that I talk about joy is like a XY graph of uncertainty and time, where uncertainty decreases over time. So it's this downward slope. In the literature, that's called becoming good at finding joy is called slope chasing. So it's like you're looking for those downward slopes, and the steeper that slope, usually the more joy you're experiencing. When you really like
Hmm.
suddenly something amazing happens, like it's almost like the more sudden it is, the more like excitation there is, and the more you get that like wow, like that like upswelling. So that's like one description, and then anxiety would be the other direction. It would be like uncertainty increasing over time. Um,
Hmm.
but this is
Can I
very.
ask you?
I was just going
Yes,
to
I was
say.
just gonna say, can I ask you a
Oh,
question
yeah.
there? But please
No,
finish. Yeah, you're
I'll
good.
just finish that last little point, and then please, just to say that this is very overview level, in the sense that like this is
Hmm.
describing things in a very like mathematical way, so it misses out on a lot of the really important detail, but it still gives like quite a nice overview. That's what I wanted to say. Please go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. I think my interesting or my question with uncertainty too is it feels like such a driver. And you said earlier on that exploration and uncertainty, you were kind of pursuing uncertainty actively. So where do you feel like the helpfulness of uncertainty, where does that transition for you? If somebody is, let's say in their personal movement practice, or if you're working with somebody, how do you determine when you need to introduce more? Because I think that we know from parkour that there's a lot of times where in a maybe a lower risk situation or something, the uncertainty is fun because you're exploring, can I actually do this thing or is this thing possible? And that can be exciting versus the uncertainty of, am I gonna fall to my inevitable doom, which is a lower valence experience, obviously. But how do you balance that in your own practice or when you're working with somebody?
Well, yeah, it's an amazing question. So the question is when to introduce more uncertainty.
Mhm.
I think it really depends. If we're talking about anxiety, then it really depends on like the kind of the way that the anxiety is manifest. For the person who you could say has hypervigilant anxiety, where they kind of lack structure, their response to uncertainty is to distrust the environment, and this kind of person would usually lack might as a stereotype might kind of lack some coordination. They might lack some capacity to focus, like this kind of thing. So I think they're introducing uncertainty probably not so helpful. um, but on the other side, the person who's a bit more stiff and rigid, the person who's a bit more maybe like narrative driven, or yeah, just less
Mhm.
flexible. For this kind of person, I think it can be really helpful to introduce more uncertainty and also ways of accepting the uncertainty that is already present, of which there is a lot. So, for example, like when you narrativize things, like you're reducing the
Mhm.
uncertainty, um, but you're probably doing that in a not very fresh way a lot of the time. You're kind of recycling narratives. And the downside of that is that you'll often lose opportunities for new things to happen.
Mm.
So yeah, um, yeah, I think it can be nice to go out and adventure and things like this, but I think there's also a level of like, can I sit with the uncertainty that's already there? Um, that's where some like meditation practices can be really nice. Uh, and when I say
Mhm.
nice, I actually mean like very unpleasant, because you're suddenly exposed to like, oh, there's all of these like unpleasant tensions in my body. Do I know how to sit with these without reducing them in some way, like fiddling or
Mhm.
narrativizing or getting up and leaving, but actually just being able to sit, um, uh, and be to be open and relaxed enough. So yeah, but I think for a lot of people, more uncertainty would be beneficial because it's also one of the key ingredients of joy, right? Like in this model
Mhm.
where joy is like a downward slope, to experience joy, you actually need uncertainty. Like it's an ingredient of joy. It would be kind of like symmetry plus uncertainty or something like that, or plus like a downward slope. Um, so yeah, I think for a lot of people, a lot of like gym goers and like average Joes and stuff like this, it's like that's why again that's why I love the exploration class, the exploration session. It's not a class, because you're exposed to so much uncertainty and opportunity. Like we had a lady there, Sue, shout out Sue, um, who she's like a little bit older, and so we were exposed to some situations like where it was like climbing scaffolding was an invitation that I gave, and so she was there
Mhm.
and she was like, to what extent do I decide to engage with this? What invitations are there for me that I feel like a connection to? And this is something that I share in my like classes and practical work, is like mapping different like arousal states to different kinds of predictions. There's
Mhm.
also really interesting work in a parkour context, is like when we feel a sense of like the heart beating faster is a mobilization response, and we only get a mobilization response when there's something to mobilize towards. That anxiety, which we tend to feel more like down in the gut or kind of in the nerves, is
Mhm.
less localized, it's less directional, and that's usually a
Yeah.
sign that there's kind of too high uncertainty and you can't even imagine doing it. It's like unimaginable uncertainty, whereas the kind of mobilization response is like imaginable uncertainty. And so the compression of that is listen to your gut but follow your heart.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah,
That's
what
really
one?
That's
Yeah, no,
cool.
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, you're good. I'm just processing.
Yeah, and it's really like you can really do that empirically. Like you can just notice like what are these responses, and it's something that you can um, learn to kind of control or direct. Maybe it's a better word. I had a really nice.
Hmm.
I was in London recently, and I taught a couple of classes, and there was one young man trying a jump like between these two posts in a parkour park, and he was like not really trying it, like he was kind of jumping to the side, but like not really with enthusiasm. So I said, "Okay, stand on the post, uh, look at the jump, tell yourself that you're going to do it, feel that surge of energy. This is the word that I use, of energy, and then direct that towards the jump." And boom, then he was able to do it. And it's like you get strong experiences from it. So I think we have some kind of innate tools for engaging with uncertainty. And like Dom Tomaso is like probably the best in the world at this because he can elevate, like go Super Saiyan mode where he's elevating an extra like 50% of his ability when he's in the right state. So I think you see someone like
Yeah.
Dom, like he's really able to access these mobilization states while staying actually very relaxed. Like I think he's probably like the lowest possible level of neuroticism. I don't know, but he's like very, very chill. So I think he's able to stay very like relaxed and open. Whereas a lot of people have to
Hmm.
learn how to do that because they will naturally like tense up when they feel all of that arousal, all of that energy. So that's
Yeah.
also something that if you want to develop, if you want to do more like fear-based stuff, or you want to overcome fear, actually learning how to tolerate, manage, and direct those kinds of states is like that's going to be a really powerful thing for you.
I think that's a great takeaway. The way that you just described sort of physically visualizing the fact that a lot of fear and anxiety, particularly in the context of movement, manifests as this um, non-directional or amorphous tension, and that sometimes you just need to give it a direction. And even like the language around saying, okay, you're feeling all of this energy, a lot of the anxiety is because you're not giving it somewhere to go. So put it in the direction of that jump. Sounds like something that I could play around with a lot because I think that is having the idea like, okay, I know I have this energy and it needs to just go somewhere, but I don't know. I'd never really thought of it that way. So I think that's really helpful. Dom is definitely a good person. I think you hear a lot of people also talk about sort of just like letting the mind go blank. And in certain states, that can absolutely happen. But I think when you're trying to sort of disperse the energy to get to that serene emotional state, but you are in this like high arousal, you have high anxiety, you can't really disperse that level of energy. It needs to mobilize, to your point. So I think it is good to have the language. It's helpful for me at least to hear you having the language around identifying what kind of state you're in and then identifying how to maybe change your approach depending on that state. And that feels like something that's universal. I think again, like this is a parkour a parkour directed podcast. So I'm putting a lot of these things in context of parkour, but I mean, I'm even thinking on a broad level when you're stressed in life, understanding the difference between I feel overwhelmed, I need this energy to be directed at a task, or, I need to take all of this anxiety or fear or whatever it is that I have and put it somewhere, um, versus, I'm feeling low energy and I need to just kind of accept that and let it
Yeah,
let it broaden and mellow out and kind of disperse through
yeah,
my body. So I don't I we got through one of our mega questions. I won't maybe get us through all three, but this maybe is a good place to kind of wrap it back around. Your view of the emotional athlete in the context for maybe somebody who is a parkour athlete or where at least movement is a core part of their life and how they experience life. What do you think what is the motivation? Um, or what do you hopes that somebody can get from approaching the relationship to movement and their body in this more holistic, integrated framework.
Mm, yeah. The answer that comes immediately is to find a way to take it less seriously. Um,
Host less podcasts about movement, probably
no,
the
like
number one
not like
answer. Yeah.
in what we're doing, but in our emotional world, it is or it can be very fluid, and it's not that these things don't have like a material impact. Um, but I think we're very, because of these uncertainty reduction tendencies, we build narratives very quickly, and so we kind of coalesce on interpretations of emotional states, and those emotional states can then become more like rigid and stuck
Mm.
and more difficult to move out of. So I think in that sense, this would be like um, one product that I would hope would come out of this work would be like emotional flexibility is something that's like unbelievably valuable to just go like, oh, I'm in a slightly lower arousal state, so what can I do to like upregulate or to get more excited or feel more joy. um and so right now, this in this initial process, like I'm just creating the or finding the language that is best, that can describe, ideally that can describe both like affect, cognition, and movement, because there are two kind of different theories that are good at different things, and it's a bit hard to integrate them. But that's kind of the process I'm in right now. But later on, there are tasks like creating some maps through this like core affect space, um, and just to base that on like empirical science, basically, or like what is like, for example, like I've done one map that's I haven't released yet, but it's like what's it called? Positive. I can't remember, but it's like a positive affect therapy. That's what it's called. Approach to depression. And so I've
Hmm.
just tried to map like what is the process that's been like very well received. Like it has amazing uh, validity to it. So how does that process of positive affect therapy as a treatment for depression, which has been proven to be very successful, how does that map onto the core affect space? And so hopefully to provide some kind of intuitive like pathways that are like empirically valid as much as possible. So yeah, I think that would be like one big thing would be like emotional flexibility, finding well-being, but then also on the other side would be like performance, would be like how do we get into these like clutch moments? Like how do we get into these mobilization states that allow us to go, Super Saiyan, that extra like 10 or 20%. Like this is something that's also really interesting. I've always been really interested in that in my practice. Like what are the environments, what are the contexts that allow me to suddenly leap up a level of performance. And then I'm looking back like a week later and like, how did that happen, like what were the magical ingredients. um and so a lot of work has been done in that. um I think it's also really interesting looking at things like the mechanisms of like anxious breakdown under pressure, like choking, stuff like this. Like this is all
Mm.
quite low hanging fruit for like
Hmm.
improving performance, because you can recognize, again, it's like about uncertainty. It's like the moment when you're just about to break a jump or do a challenge. It's like uncertainty is at the highest. So what do you do in that context? A lot of the time we reach for like verbal explicit control, where we start to think about things and we really start to like overthink. And that is, for some people more than others, pretty disastrous. That can reduce performance by, like, it's studied that it's been up to 30%. This is in golfers.
Wow.
um, but they found that you can get like a 30% performance reduction by
Mm.
trying to like cognitively control your movement or verbally control your movement. So that's huge. Like imagine getting thirty
Yeah.
percent better. It's like that would be a huge amount better. And imagine getting 30% worse. It's like that's a lot worse. So there are things like this that are pretty accessible. Um, yeah,
I'm very excited for that. I like what you said also, and it takes me back to you were talking about how we have the tendency or certain tendencies when we're experiencing anxiety or uncertainty to create these narratives and then sort of relive or uh recapitulate them and with minor changes and adjustments. And I think it's a powerful to have a framework that allows you to experience various emotional states and move between them and realize that it's the same as it's a part of your body in the same way that various physical states of fatigue or, feeling strong or hungry or whatever it is, like they're all acceptable, um, in that they are temporary and they're not necessarily creating an immutable narrative of who you are as a person. And I think seeing them as tools, and seeing that there is this sort of there's a bilateral relationship between our bodies and our emotional state, that your emotional state obviously can have a huge impact on how you move and experience the world, but simultaneously that the way that you move and experience the world can likewise impact your emotional state
yeah,
is incredibly
exactly.
powerful and
Yeah,
feels like something that is, you know, just now people are really, really digging into. And I'm excited to see, I have been excited to see all the work that you're doing. And I'm very excited to see
thank
the culmination of it in this book when it comes out. No pressure to get it done
you.
quickly, but
Yeah, yeah. Taking my time. Yeah.
yes. Well, that feels like a great place to end. I always like to ask one final question, and I'm very curious for your answer because I know how well read and well researched you are. What would be one piece of media that you would recommend to the listener? It doesn't have to be even related to the stuff we talked about today, but could be a book, podcast, film,
I've got a
anything.
very easy answer for this. I was thinking about this earlier today. Is you'll have to do a bit of digging. We can dig together and find it, but it's I think it's called "What Long Thought Lost," and it's like a very early parkour video of a guy called
Okay.
Elliot, who was doing parkour in the South Bank, like around Waterloo. He was one of the first people I ever saw doing parkour, and when I saw him, it what he was doing was so different to my idea of parkour that I thought he was some kind of monk. So he was his video that he made. It's really a like explorative piece of art. Like it's just really beautiful,
Huh.
and I think this kind of orientation towards like when we talk about movement as art, I think that's something that we can also take more seriously in terms of like what am I exploring by creating this, by by producing a video or producing creating a product. I think people talk a lot about like parkour is art, and I think it can be, and it also can sometimes not be, and that's another like thing to like talk about. Like that's an interesting conversation, but um, I think people can take that more seriously in terms of like really exploring, really exploring like what something means to them, and you know, like engaging with uncertainty in a creative process. So it's not just like let's get out and film some bangers. It's like that's very explicit. Like you know exactly what you're doing. I think art has to have a level of uncertainty about it, where you don't know exactly what you're doing, or you cannot perfectly like verbally express what you're trying to express. So you have to like show it, like stuff like this.
Hmm.
So yeah, this would be my recommendation. Hopefully we can find it together and maybe you can link it. But yeah, what long thought
Yeah.
lost. That's from Elliot.
Wow. I'll definitely search for that and check it out. I think that art and the role of what art means in relationship to movement has come up a lot on this podcast. I think it's kind of like we were talking about how everybody is redefining or how we're all sort of collectively figuring out what it means to practice this sport as it constantly changes and evolves in its sort of nascent phase still is really fascinating. I now see how Sam, Kopik, you, and Callum had a 3 hour plus conversation on a
Yeah, we could keep
podcast
going.
because we could just dig in right now, but we'll
Yeah.
have to save it for another time for our
Now
listeners.
we're in
Flynn,
now we're in dad mode. We're capped.
exactly. Yeah, we're like, oh, it's gonna be bedtime soon. I gotta get
Yeah,
ready to read.
exactly.
I gotta get ready to read the ABC Dr. Seuss book 7 times. Well, have a great evening. Thank you for making time. I really appreciate it. It's been fantastic to catch up with you again. All right, that was Flynn Disney. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Like I said in the intro, there's so much to digest in here, and we only scratched the surface. I was looking at the time, and we were an hour and a half in, and I feel like I kind of had to abandon ship on a couple questions before we dove fully into them. So this might be another one where if you have aspects of this conversation that you want to see examined in more detail, or you want to hear a little bit more from Flynn, let me know in the comments. I would love to do a second chat with him and dive a little bit deeper into some of these concepts. But if you, in your own time, want to research a bit more, check out Flynn's Instagram, check out his Substack. Again, I'm going to link all of that in the description. And I think that would be a great place to continue your investigation into what it means to be an emotional athlete and live a life that has fully connected aspects of movement, emotions, and yeah, just connecting our bodies, our minds, and everything else that goes into the human experience. Thank you as always for listening. I will catch you guys next week.